Today, we're going to be digging into the topic of atheism, why atheists actually don't exist.
That we are, and it's going to be rich.
I know that's a very controversial statement to make.
Well, it should be controversial, presupposing that everyone who doesn't have your beliefs doesn't actually hold the view they espouse. But unfortunately, this isn't a controversial claim within Christian circles. In fact, they very frequently and with glee assert such dishonesty from atheists. And it's because this claim is so prevalent that it deserves a response. The clip from Isaac of Daily Disciple that we're about to hear from is quite lengthy, but it's necessary to address the claim. So buckle up.
So I pulled up Romans 1:18, and I just want to read this section because I think this talks specifically about atheism and this kind of whole, worldview that they have. So I'll read here. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or gave thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for the images resembling mortal man, and birds and animals and creeping things. There's a lot to unpack in that section of scripture.
Isaac goes on to say a few tangential things, which you can see for yourself by visiting his channel, but I'm going to fast forward to the crux.
He says, look, everyone knows I exist. Everyone knows God exists. They simply suppress that truth in their unrighteousness.
Quite the claim, right? Atheists, all of us, are, according to Isaac and many Christians, simply suppressing that their God exists. Really, we know God exists, but we're fooling ourselves. It's hard to understate just how wild this claim is. You'd be hard-pressed to find such nefarious assumptions being taken seriously when it comes to any other claim. So let's begin by calling this what it is: a childish attempt to avoid actually engaging with atheist arguments and concerns by making outrageously distasteful assumptions about our sincerity and motives. I, for one, am thoroughly convinced that my non-belief is genuine. For all of my sarcasm on the surface, do not mistake me. I am deeply invested in theism, and particularly Christianity. I've examined the arguments for God's existence, and I've found them wanting. I am more intimate with the Bible than most Christians. But for all my efforts, I simply see no compelling evidence that any gods exist, much less the specific deity of Christianity. Regardless, Isaac has to call me a liar here, or at the very least, disingenuous.
Who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth.
To me, the fact that so many Christians retort to this atheists don't really exist statement, rather than presenting a convincing case for their God, speaks volumes. If they had good reasons and evidence to believe, they wouldn't need to malign the characters of atheists. They'd opt for 1 Peter 3:15, which commands believers to always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope that you have. Then, perhaps, believers could move on to demonstrate that they actually understand atheism, because it ain't some cartoonish rebellion against a God we secretly know exists.
For a lot of atheists, they just don't like God. They don't like God, and as much as they would like to say, hey, look, no, it's because of all the different, research that I've done and all these kind of facts that no, God doesn't exist, the Bible makes it clear the fact that, look, we like our sin. We like staying in the filth and the muck because it feels good to us. We like pursuing our own selfish desires. We like not having somebody that keeps us accountable for our own sin. We like that.
And now, my fellow apes, we are treated to another chestnut, a favourite among the most dim-witted and dishonest of religious apologists. Atheists just want to sin.
We like staying in the filth and the muck because it feels good to us.
This is what motivates, or at least enables, Christians like Isaac to say that we atheists are disingenuous in our beliefs. They take our moral objections of God killing babies, for instance, and use this as a means to dismiss our intellectual objections. So allow me to be clear. This is nothing more than an ad hominem attack, a pathetic attempt to discredit atheists by painting us as immoral hedonists who reject God to indulge in baseless desires. It's the kind of thinking, if it can even be called that one expects from a petty cult leader. Yet, in religion, such ironically immoral behaviour is a feature, not a bug. But let's address the notion that atheists simply don't like God.
They just don't like God.
When we examine the Bible, what do we find? A deity who sanctions and even commands genocide, infanticide, slavery, and all manners of atrocities. A God who orders the slaughter of entire nations, down to the women and children, for the crime of occupying land that he promised to his chosen people. If this is the God we are supposed to love, then I submit he is not worthy of our affection, but rather our contempt. As Thomas Paine expressed, belief in a cruel God makes for a cruel man. The God of the Bible is a moral monster, and to worship such a being would be to betray everything that is good within me. But there we go, right? I've given Isaac what he wants. He can now discount my intellectual ammo, for it sits in an emotional cannon. But let's truly break this down. It's at this juncture that the supposed all-loving state of God comes into question. An atheist such as myself will combine the aforementioned atrocities committed by God with the problem of evil, the inconsistencies and contradictions within the sacred texts, and the lack of empirical evidence, of which all of these point to the conclusion that the God of Christianity is a human invention, not a real entity. The biblical God is a tribal deity reflecting the prejudice and power structures of the ancient Near East. He is a God of war, of judgment, of retribution, not a God of universal love and compassion. Still, if God is indeed all-loving, then is it not obvious that atheists would, if shown the light, fall to their knees? If, somehow, the overwhelming evidence against such a God turns out to be false, don't you think that we'd be singing alongside the Christians? Put it this way. Is it even conceivable for a human to dislike a being whose very nature is love? Imagine a God who truly cared for all of his creation, who sought to alleviate suffering and promote human flourishing, a God whose moral character aligned perfectly with our deepest values of compassion, justice, and equality. A God who didn't play favourites, who didn't condemn people to eternal torment for thought crimes, who didn't sanction genocide or slavery or any other moral atrocity we find in the Bible. Who wouldn't want to believe in such a God? Surely, by definition, everyone would want to believe in this God. The truth is, if convincing evidence existed for a truly loving, just, and moral God, I would readily embrace that belief. We atheists are not opposed to God out of stubbornness or a desire to sin. No, it's the portrayal of God in Scripture and the lack of empirical evidence that makes belief untenable for us. Until Christians can provide a rational basis for belief that addresses these issues, appeals to our supposed dishonesty or immorality will remain hollow and unconvincing. So I say to Christians like Isaac, if you truly believe we atheists are mistaken, then engage with our arguments, present evidence for your God that withstands scrutiny, wrestle with the moral contradictions in Scripture and the theological dilemmas that they create. Claiming that we secretly believe and that we're in a rebellion against God merely demonstrates the weakness of your position. Atheists are here in ever-growing numbers. We're not going away and we're not lying about what we believe. It's time to take us and the substance of our disagreement seriously. If your God is real, you should welcome that challenge with confidence. The last thing to be said is, do you really believe that an all-powerful, all-loving God would forsake someone such as me? If you just assume for a moment that I am earnest, that I really have pursued this with my heart, with wanting to know what's true, do you really think such a God would forsake me? For what? I'm serious. For what? What loving father would eternally abandon their child because they earnestly were not able to convince themselves of absurdities? Is this really compatible with such a character? Well, I'll say this. Despite it being incredibly unlikely that there are billions of human beings that are suppressing the truth as Isaac and other Christians claim, this is, nevertheless, what they need to convince themselves of, and this is why they're so quick to buy such an awful view of atheists. We can call it, let's say, Christian love.
I just want to say I love you, and I'm sorry, because sometimes we need to speak the truth, but we also need to speak the truth in love.